Hello, and welcome to G Fun Facts Online, the show that digs into the amazing science behind our world. Today, we're talking about a concept that completely changed how we see the natural world. Imagine a beautiful, complex tapestry woven from countless threads of life. For a long time, we thought every thread was more or less equal. But what if that's not true? What if pulling a single, seemingly small thread could cause the entire tapestry to unravel? This is the idea behind one of the most powerful concepts in ecology, the keystone species. The term comes from architecture. A keystone is that central, wedge-shaped stone at the very top of an arch. It actually bears the least weight of any stone, but if you remove it, the whole arch collapses instantly. In the 1960s, a zoologist named Robert T. Payne saw this architectural principle playing out in the tide pools of the Pacific Northwest, and his insight would give us a new language for understanding life. A keystone species is an organism whose impact on its environment is huge, completely out of proportion to its size or numbers. They are the linchpins, the players that hold the whole community together. Removing one can trigger a cascade of extinctions and fundamentally change an ecosystem, or even destroy it. So today, we're going to explore these critical creatures. We'll look at the groundbreaking experiment that started it all, meet the different types of keystones, from predators to engineers, and see the dramatic consequences when they disappear, and the amazing recoveries when they return. This isn't just an academic exercise. Understanding keystone species is fundamental to preserving the natural world that we all depend on. Our story begins on the rocky, wave-battered coast of Washington State in the 1960s. A young ecologist, Robert T. Payne, was studying the vibrant life in the intertidal zone. It was a mosaic of barnacles, mussels, and algae, all fighting for space on the rocks. And watching over this community was a top predator, the ochre starfish, Pisaster ocraceus. Payne wanted to test an idea called the green world hypothesis, which suggested that predators were crucial for keeping herbivore populations from wiping out all the plants. So he designed an elegantly simple experiment. In one section of the shoreline, he did something that must have felt very strange. He started prying every single ochre starfish off the rocks and tossing them back into the ocean. He did this over and over, keeping his experimental plot completely starfish-free. What happened next was astounding. Without their main predator, the population of mussels exploded. They were the bullies of the tide pool, and now their bully was gone. They began to cover everything, forming thick mats that smothered all the other species. The biodiversity of the area plummeted. In just a few years, an area that had supported 15 different species was dominated by just one, the mussel. The removal of a single species had caused the entire community structure to collapse. Payne had proven that not all species are created equal. The starfish, though not the most numerous creature, exerted a disproportionate influence, maintaining the diversity of its community. In his famous 1969 paper, he called it a keystone species. It's important to know that a keystone species isn't the same as a dominant species, which is just the most abundant, like the trees in a forest. And it's not a foundation species, like coral, which actually creates the habitat itself. The defining trait of a keystone is its function. Its impact is massive, far greater than you'd expect based on its size or numbers alone. This concept became a cornerstone of conservation, giving us a powerful way to understand that to protect biodiversity, we have to prioritize protecting the species that matter most. The keystone role isn't just for predators. Ecologists have identified several types, each shaping their world in a unique way. Let's start with the classic category, keystone predators. These are the guardians of balance. By keeping certain populations in check, they prevent any one species from taking over, which allows more types of life to thrive. The most famous example is probably the sea otter. In the kelp forests of the North Pacific, sea otters are obsessed with eating sea urchins. Sea urchins, in turn, are obsessed with eating kelp. When sea otters were hunted to near extinction for their fur, the sea urchin populations exploded. They swarmed across the seafloor, mowing down the vast underwater kelp forests and creating what scientists call urchin barrens, empty, desolate landscapes. This was a catastrophe. Kelp forests are like underwater rainforests. They provide food and shelter for hundreds of species, from tiny fish to seals and seabirds. When the kelp vanished, so did the life that depended on it. But where sea otters have been protected and their populations have recovered, the kelp forests have grown back, proving the otter is the guardian of this entire ecosystem. An even more dramatic story comes from Yellowstone National Park. For 70 years, there were no gray wolves in Yellowstone. They had been completely wiped out. In their absence, the elk population soared. The herds of elk overgrazed the park, especially the young willow and aspen trees that grew along the riverbanks. The loss of these trees had a ripple effect that nobody had predicted. Songbird populations declined. Beavers, who need willows for food and for building their dams, almost completely disappeared. And without beaver dams to slow the water and create pools, the rivers themselves started to change, becoming wider, shallower, and causing more erosion. Then, in 1995, scientists did something bold. They reintroduced gray wolves to the park. The wolves began to prey on the elk, which was expected. But their impact was so much more than just numbers. They changed the behavior of the elk. The elk started avoiding valleys and gorges where they could be easily ambushed. This created a landscape of fear, which gave the ravaged trees a chance to recover. And as the willows and aspens grew back, the songbirds returned. The beavers returned. And the beavers, being world-class engineers, started building dams again. These dams created ponds and wetlands that became havens for amphibians, fish, and even moose. The rivers stabilized. The erosion slowed. The entire ecosystem became more diverse and resilient. The wolves, by reclaiming their throne as the apex predator, had re-established the balance of the entire park, proving they were the keystone. This brings us to our next category, ecosystem engineers. These are the world shapers, species that physically create, modify, or maintain habitats. And as we just heard, beavers are the quintessential example. They are nature's hydrologists. By cutting down trees and building dams, they turn simple, free-flowing streams into complex patchworks of ponds, meadows, and wetlands. These new habitats become biodiversity hotspots, supporting everything from fish and frogs to ducks and insects. Their dams even improve water quality by trapping sediment. On the Great Plains of North America, you have prairie dogs. These little rodents are masters of underground engineering. They live in huge colonies called towns, with elaborate tunnel networks. Their burrowing aerates the soil and helps water penetrate deeper. Their grazing encourages a wider variety of plants to grow. And most importantly, their burrows become ready-made homes for other animals, like burrowing owls, black-footed ferrets, rattlesnakes, and amphibians. A prairie dog town supports a level of biodiversity far greater than the surrounding grassland. Then in Africa, you have elephants. They are keystone engineers on a massive scale. They knock down trees, which keeps the savanna from turning into forest, maintaining the open grasslands that so many other animals need. They dig water holes in dry riverbeds, providing the only source of water for miles during a drought. They are also incredible seed dispersers, eating fruit and depositing the seeds miles away in a big pile of natural fertilizer. They literally shape the landscape they live in. Our third category is a bit more subtle, but just as critical: keystone mutualists. A mutualism is a relationship where two species help each other out. A keystone mutualist is a species whose partnership is so important that the whole system would fail without it. Think about pollinators. In some desert or mountain regions, a specific species of hummingbird might be the only animal capable of pollinating an entire group of plants with specially shaped flowers. Without that one hummingbird species, those plants can't reproduce, which affects the animals that eat those plants and so on up the food chain. Bees, of course, are keystone pollinators in countless ecosystems, responsible for the survival of a huge percentage of the world's flowering plants, including most of the crops we eat. Another fascinating example is the fig tree and the fig wasp. It's a very exclusive relationship. Each species of fig tree is typically pollinated by just one or two species of tiny wasp. The wasp, in turn, can only lay its eggs inside that specific fig. They completely depend on each other. What makes this a keystone relationship is that fig trees produce fruit all year round. In many tropical forests, they provide a reliable source of food for monkeys, birds, and bats, especially when other food is scarce. By keeping these animals fed, the fig-wasp partnership supports the entire forest community. From the wolf that reshapes rivers to the bee that underpins our food supply, these species show us that the health of an entire ecosystem can hinge on just a few critical players. So what happens when the keystone crumbles? The result is a chain reaction called a trophic cascade. As we saw with the wolves and sea otters, the effects flow down through the entire food web. When a keystone predator disappears, you often get what's called mesopredator release. Mid-sized predators like coyotes or raccoons are normally kept in check by the bigger apex predator. Without that control, their populations can explode, and they can devastate populations of smaller animals like songbirds or reptiles. The cascade continues. Without the predator, the herbivore population runs wild. The elk in Yellowstone, the urchins on the Pacific coast. They overgraze and decimate the plant life, which fundamentally changes the physical structure of the habitat. The ecosystem becomes simpler, less structured, and much less diverse. This loss of diversity erodes an ecosystem's resilience, its ability to bounce back from disturbances like fires or droughts. A diverse ecosystem is like a well-diversified stock portfolio. It has insurance. A simplified one, like the muscle-covered rocks in Payne's experiment, is incredibly vulnerable. A single disease could wipe everything out. Sometimes, this can lead to a permanent regime shift, where an ecosystem flips into a completely different, impoverished state, like the shift from a kelp forest to an urchin barren. It's incredibly difficult to reverse, and this directly impacts us. The loss of keystone species compromises the ecosystem services we rely on. When beavers disappear, we lose their water filtration and flood control. The decline of bees threatens global food security. Healthy ecosystems, often maintained by keystone species, store carbon, helping to regulate our climate. The silence left by a vanished keystone is the sound of an ecosystem in distress. Today, these vital species are facing a barrage of modern threats, almost all driven by us. Habitat destruction is the biggest one. As we convert land for cities and farms, we squeeze animals like wolves and tigers into ever smaller fragments of wilderness, increasing conflict and reducing genetic diversity. Climate change is altering the fundamental conditions of life. Warmer oceans cause coral bleaching and threaten the cold water kelp forests. The timing of natural events is getting scrambled, creating mismatches between flowers and their pollinators. Then there's overexploitation. Tens of millions of sharks are killed every year, decimating the ocean's keystone predators. And pollution, from pesticides that harm bees to plastics and chemicals that accumulate in the bodies of marine mammals, poisons these animals from the inside out. All of these threats combine, creating a perfect storm that puts the species that hold our world together in incredible peril. But this isn't a eulogy. It's a call to action, and there is real hope. The science of restoration ecology shows us that we can help these ecosystems heal. The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone is the poster child for this. Their return set off a cascade of positive changes that revitalized the entire park. The recovery of the sea otter, thanks to legal protections, allowed the magnificent kelp forests to return. Wildlife managers are now actively relocating beavers to degraded streams, using their natural engineering talent as a cost-effective way to restore entire watersheds. These success stories show that focusing our conservation efforts on keystone species has an enormous return on investment. By protecting one critical species, you can restore the function and vitality of an entire ecosystem. It's a powerful idea. We can be active agents of recovery. We can use science to help put the keystone back in the arch. So, as we've seen, ecosystems aren't just a random collection of species. They are intricate structures held in place by the profound influence of a few key players. From the starfish that maintains diversity on a rocky shore, to the wolf that changes the course of rivers, to the bee that makes our food possible, keystone species are the guardians of stability and complexity in the natural world. Their decline is a warning that the ecological arches that support all life, including our own, are weakening. But their restoration is a powerful story of hope. It proves that change is possible, and that we have the knowledge to help heal the planet. Protecting the world's keystone species requires us to see the connections, to understand that the fate of the otter is tied to the health of the ocean, and the fate of the wolf is tied to the health of the land. By working to protect them, we aren't just saving an animal. We are reinforcing the arches of the living world, ensuring they remain strong and stable for generations to come. Thanks for listening to Fun Facts Online.